He was the man next door, the kind of person you would trust without a second thought, with a smile that could disarm even the most cautious soul. He was intelligent, studying law, with political ambitions that seemed probable. People described him as charming and kind. Behind that facade, something sinister was lurking. This was the paradox of Ted Bundy, a man who presented one face to the world while hiding a terrifying one. He was a chameleon, using his perceived normalcy as his greatest weapon. It shatters the illusion that evil is easily identifiable. Communities felt safer, and strangers were often met with help. It was into this world that Ted Bundy unleashed his reign of terror, exploiting innocence. His methods were a cruel mockery of human compassion. This question haunts us still. How could such profound evil hide in plain sight for so long? The news reports started as whispers, then grew into a storm of fear that swept across the Pacific Northwest and beyond. Young women were disappearing, bright, promising college students who vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and terrified communities. At first the cases seemed unrelated, isolated tragedies in different towns and states. But as investigators began to connect the dots, a horrifying pattern emerged. The victims were strikingly similar, young, attractive, with long dark hair often parted in the middle. The realization dawned that this was not a series of random acts, but the work of a single, methodical predator who was hunting them. He was a ghost, a phantom who moved silently through Washington, Oregon, Utah, and Colorado. He left behind a trail of grief and very little evidence. The sheer audacity of his crimes was baffling to law enforcement. He was brazen, attacking in broad daylight in some instances. Yet he remained elusive, a faceless terror that preyed on the public's deepest fears. The name Ted was mentioned by witnesses, a handsome man in a Volkswagen Beetle, but he seemed to melt away after every attack. A deep sense of dread settled over the nation as the number of missing women climbed, and the search for this unknown killer became one of the largest and most desperate in American history. This is not just a story of crime. It is a story of profound and devastating deception. Ted Bundy did not just murder his victims, he murdered the sense of security for an entire generation. He forced a nation to confront an uncomfortable truth, that evil is not always a shadowy figure lurking in a dark alley. It can be the handsome, well-spoken man who offers to help you, the aspiring lawyer who debates politics with you, the charming boyfriend who tells you he loves you. Bundy exploited the very fabric of social trust, turning everyday interactions into potential death traps. His legacy is a permanent scar on the American consciousness. The tale of Ted Bundy is a chilling journey into the heart of darkness, a look inside the mind of a man who was, by his own admission, the most cold-hearted son of a bitch you'll ever meet. It is a story that forces us to look closer at the people around us, and to acknowledge the terrifying reality that some human beings are predators hiding in plain sight. He deceived a nation, manipulated the justice system, and became a gruesome celebrity in the process. This is the horrifying true story of how one man's charming smile masked a soulless monster, leaving a legacy of fear that lingers to this very day. The story of the man who would become Ted Bundy began with a secret. He was born Theodore Robert Cowell in 1946, at a home for unwed mothers in Vermont. To shield the family from scandal, a story was carefully constructed. He was raised under a deception. The woman he knew as his older sister was, in fact, his mother. The people he called mom and dad were his grandparents. This fundamental lie cast a long, dark shadow over his formative years. The identity of his biological father was another mystery. This absence of a paternal figure created a deep void in his sense of self. This lack of a truthful identity would fester within him, creating a fertile ground for the darkness that was to come. This early education in deceit would become a cornerstone of his personality. The family secret that was meant to protect him instead planted a seed of alienation and resentment. Even as a young boy, there were unsettling signs. While other children were learning to share and play, a different kind of curiosity was awakening in Ted. He was described as a solitary child, often lost in a world that seemed to have a disturbingly dark undercurrent. There were whispers of cruelty to animals, a classic warning sign that often goes unheeded. This fascination centered on knives. It was an obsession. One of the most disturbing anecdotes involves his aunt, who awoke to find herself surrounded by kitchen knives. In hindsight, it looks like a chilling rehearsal. As he entered his teenage years, the boy who was once just quiet became painfully shy and insecure. The quiet, lonely boy also developed a secret, sordid habit: voyeurism. From the safety of the shadows, he could watch people in their most private, unguarded moments. It was a stepping stone from dark thoughts to dark deeds, moving him ever closer to the precipice of violence. Ted Bundy began building a facade. He enrolled at the University of Washington, studying psychology and mimicking social cues. He projected an image of confident charm. During this time, he entered a relationship with Diane Edwards. She was everything Ted aspired to be. To the insecure boy from Tacoma, she represented a world he desperately wanted. But the relationship ended, leaving him devastated. The rejection was a profound invalidation. Years later, he rekindled their relationship, only to abruptly cut her off. It was an act of calculated cruelty. 1974 marked a terrifying turning point. Ted Bundy's dark fantasies spilled into the real world with catastrophic consequences in Seattle. His first known victim was Linda Ann Healy, a 21-year-old psychology student. She read weather reports for a local radio station. On February 1, 1974, she vanished. Her roommate found her bed neatly made with a bloodstain on the pillow. There were no signs of forced entry. This was Bundy's terrifying genius at work, meticulous planning, operating without a trace. He had spirited her away into the night. More than a year later, her remains were discovered alongside other victims. With this first kill, the monster was fully awake. Bundy was a hunter, perfecting his techniques with cold precision. His greatest asset was his harmless appearance and easy charm. He weaponized trust, turning it into the key that unlocked his victims' defenses. One ruse involved feigning injury, often seen with a sling or crutches. He'd ask for help, a cruel manipulation of decency. Another deception was impersonating authority, projecting an aura of control. His light-colored Volkswagen Beetle was modified for a sinister purpose. He removed the passenger side door handle and seat, creating a mobile cage. As 1974 wore on, the disappearances continued with an alarming rhythm. Young women from across Washington and Oregon vanished. In July, Bundy struck twice at Lake Sammamish State Park. He approached Janice Ott and Denise Naslund, using the same ruse. The Lake Sammamish abductions provided investigators with their first solid leads. Witnesses described a handsome young man who introduced himself as Ted, driving a tan Volkswagen Beetle. Despite being a suspect, he was dismissed as too normal. The disappearances created intense fear. The Phantom Killer was becoming a national story. He was killing the region's sense of safety. The final destination for Bundy's victims was often a desolate, secluded spot deep in the wilderness. He chose remote forests and hillsides, places far from the prying eyes of civilization, to carry out the rest of his horrific rituals and dispose of the evidence. Taylor Mountain, a rugged wooded area east of Seattle, became one of his primary dumping grounds. It was here, in the quiet solemnity of the forest, that the full scope of his depravity was unleashed. These were not quick, dispassionate murders. They were prolonged, sadistic acts fueled by a need for absolute power and control over another human being, extending far beyond the moment of their death. The discovery of the remains on Taylor Mountain in September 1974 finally confirmed the police's worst fears. The bones of Janice Ott and Denise Naslund, the two women abducted from Lake Sammamish, were found by hunters. Nearby, they would later find the skull of Linda Ann Healy. The scene told a gruesome story. It became clear that Bundy did not just dump the bodies, he created a private, macabre sanctuary for himself. Evidence suggested that he would return to these sites repeatedly, spending time with the remains of his victims. This horrifying detail pointed toward necrophilia, one of the darkest and most disturbing paraphilias, confirming he was a killer driven by far more than just the act of murder itself. These revisits were a crucial part of his psychological pathology. The act of returning to the grave sites allowed him to relive the murders, to re-experience the thrill of domination and ownership he felt over his victims. In his twisted mind, they belonged to him, even in death. He would sometimes groom the remains or engage in further sexual acts, a complete and total desecration that underscored his view of women as mere objects for his gratification. The killing fields were not just disposal sites, they were his personal trophies, secret gardens of death where he was the absolute master, a god in his own dark, horrifying world. As the net began to tighten in Washington, Bundy simply moved his hunting ground. He enrolled in law school at the University of Utah in the fall of 1974, and the pattern of terror followed him. Young women began disappearing in Utah, then in Colorado. His geographic scope was expanding, turning his crime spree into a multi-state nightmare for law enforcement. He was adaptable, changing his appearance and methods slightly, but the core signature remained the same. He was an intelligent, mobile, and prolific predator, leaving a trail of death across the American West, always seeking new territory where he could find fresh victims and create new secret killing fields. The disappearances created a frustrating puzzle for law enforcement, but the hunter was about to become the hunted. In August 1975, a Utah Highway Patrol officer spotted a familiar Volkswagen Beetle speeding away. The driver identified himself as Ted Bundy. A search revealed a crowbar, ski mask, rope, handcuffs, and an ice pick. He was arrested. The real breakthrough came when Carol Durant identified Bundy as her attacker. In March 1976, Bundy went on trial for the aggravated kidnapping of Carol Durant. He was found guilty and sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison. But his time in captivity was far from the end of the story. With a Utah conviction, investigators built a larger case against Bundy. Evidence linked him to Karen Campbell's murder in Colorado. In 1977, Bundy was extradited to Aspen for her murder trial, facing the death penalty. Confined to the Pitkin County Courthouse, Bundy plotted an audacious escape. He exploited the courthouse's lax security, acting as his own attorney to gain access to the law library. On June 7, 1977, he saw his chance. While a guard was distracted, Bundy leaped from a second-story window. Injured, he disappeared into Aspen Mountain, triggering a massive manhunt. The notorious killer was free again. After 6 days, he was spotted back in Aspen and captured. His brief freedom revealed his refusal to be caged. Returned to custody, he was transferred to a more secure facility. The Aspen escape was a rehearsal for an even more dramatic act. Back in his cell, Bundy meticulously planned his escape. He began a rigorous physical regimen, losing over 30 pounds. His target was a small opening for a light fixture in the ceiling of his cell. On December 30, 1977, he squeezed through the hole he had created. He walked out the front door into the snowy Colorado night. Bundy caught a bus out of town and vanished, heading to Florida. He adopted a new identity, calling himself Chris Hagen. He rented a small room near the Florida State University campus. The most infamous serial killer in America was free, and his most brutal chapter was about to begin. Having arrived in Florida, Ted Bundy was a predator let loose in a new hunting ground. In the pre-dawn hours of January 15, 1978, the monster fully emerged. He crept silently toward the Chi Omega sorority house. In just 15 minutes, a whirlwind of savage violence unfolded. Bundy bludgeoned his victims, including Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman. The scene that greeted law enforcement was one of unimaginable horror. A faint double-bite mark left on the body of Lisa Levy would prove to be a critical mistake. The Chi Omega massacre sent a tidal wave of panic across Tallahassee and the entire state of Florida. The brief attack at the sorority house had only whetted his appetite for more. Bundy's terror continued as he attacked another student, leaving her with permanent hearing loss. He melted into the darkness, leaving a city in fear. This time, his victim would be tragically younger. In Lake City, Kimberly Leach was enjoying a normal school day. She forgot her purse and went back to retrieve it. Ted Bundy was waiting. Kimberly vanished in broad daylight, triggering a frantic search. For weeks, there was no word. The search ended tragically nearly 2 months later. Her body was found in a remote, wooded area. The murder of a 12-year-old was a new low, even for Bundy. This final crime would ensure there would be no mercy. With the murder of Kimberly Leach, Bundy knew his time was running out. He was now the most wanted man in America. He decided to flee in a stolen orange Volkswagen Beetle. His arrogance was setting him up for his final fall. In February 1978, a Pensacola police officer spotted the Beetle and ran the license plate. The plate came back as stolen. The driver refused to cooperate, and a violent struggle ensued. Officer Lee managed to subdue him, finally getting the handcuffs on the nation's most elusive killer. He calmly stated his name, Theodore Robert Bundy. The hunt was over. The news of his capture brought a collective sigh of relief to a nation that had been living in fear. The 1979 Miami trial for the Chi Omega murders became the first televised murder trial in American history, turning Ted Bundy into a national spectacle. Bundy, relishing the spotlight, chose to represent himself, using the courtroom as his stage, cross-examining witnesses and charming the jury with his calculated charisma. His erratic behavior swung from legal eloquence to chilling outbursts, exposing the darkness beneath his facade. He forced survivors to relive their trauma, displaying a complete lack of empathy, but the evidence was overwhelming. The testimony of survivors, and most damning, the bite mark on Lisa Levy matched perfectly to Bundy's teeth. Science shattered his performance. The mask of innocence could not withstand the truth. The nation watched as Bundy's ego finally met its match in the cold, hard facts. On July 24, 1979, after less than 7 hours, the jury found Bundy guilty on all counts, 2 death sentences for the Chi Omega murders, and a third for the murder of Kimberly Leach. The man who once manipulated the system now faced the electric chair, his fate sealed. For a decade, Bundy stalled his execution with appeals and interviews, still seeking control and attention. He blamed pornography, offered to help the FBI, but no one was swayed. On January 24, 1989, crowds gathered outside Florida State Prison, not to protest, but to celebrate. At 7:16 a.m., Ted Bundy was executed, ending the reign of a killer who had haunted a nation. His death brought closure, but the questions and scars he left behind would never fully fade. Ted Bundy was the embodiment of psychopathy. No empathy, no remorse, only a chilling void where a conscience should be. His grandiose narcissism fueled his crimes and his courtroom theatrics. He believed he was above everyone. Bundy's charm was a weapon, his intelligence a tool for manipulation. He wore a mask of normalcy, deceiving everyone around him while viewing people as mere objects. At his core, he was a sadist, deriving pleasure from control, pain, and terror. His crimes were not just about killing, they were about domination and power. Bundy's pathology was a perfect storm: psychopathy, narcissism, and sadism, creating a predator unlike any other. Bundy's obsession with fame was as deep as his violence. He craved the spotlight, following his own media coverage and relishing his infamy. The televised trial was his ultimate stage, and even on death row, he granted interviews to shape his own legend. He manipulated journalists and investigators, always seeking to control the narrative. Bundy wanted to be remembered as a complex anti-hero, not a brutal killer. His chilling boasts, calling himself the most cold-hearted son of a bitch you'll ever meet, were meant to shock and impress. In the end, his charm was a mask, his intelligence a weapon, and his life a performance for an audience he desperately needed. The true horror, a man who looked so normal, yet was so profoundly evil. Bundy's execution ended his life, but not his legacy. His story remains a cautionary tale and a dark fascination in popular culture. His crimes forced advances in criminal profiling and law enforcement, honoring his victims through hard-won lessons. Yet the danger remains in romanticizing his image, overshadowing the suffering of those he destroyed. The women he killed were not just names in his story, they were real people, stolen from their futures. Bundy's shadow lingers, a reminder that evil can hide behind a charming smile. He forced society to confront its own vulnerabilities and the unsettling truth about the face of evil. The echo of his crimes warns us, the most terrifying monsters are those who walk among us, unseen. The enduring lesson of Ted Bundy is stark. Appearances can be deceptive, hiding darkness behind normalcy. Bundy shattered the illusion that we can easily identify danger. His story compels us to be more aware. Bundy's methods exploited the best of human instincts. His legacy warns us to look beyond the surface. The shadows of his crimes linger, haunting the memories of victims' families. Bundy became synonymous with the handsome predator hiding in plain sight. To remember Bundy is to honor his victims. Their lives were not statistics. Their loss measures Bundy's legacy. Never forget.